Alright, if you watched the previous video, I think it's number 5 in this heating system series, you saw how I arranged the plumbing for my heating system with a thermal tank. This is how I did the switches to control the flow between the different heat sources and the different zones that need heat. The whole thing really, the way I did it, comes down to single pole double throw switches, which I knew nothing about before I started this. Very simple concept, really. SPDT. I kept seeing that when I looked at Aquastats and other switches. I didn't know what it was, so I looked it up. Single pole double throw just means that the power comes into the switch and then it goes out through one of two other points. So say the power comes in at point C and then it either goes out through A or through B. Never neither, never both. So you have the switch set up so the power comes in, certain parameter is set. For instance, in an Aquastat, the parameter is certain temperature. When it hits that temperature, power goes out through A. Power is coming in through C, it hits the temperature, power goes out through A, falls below the temperature, power goes out through B. A little more complicated than that because what actually happens, you set the temperature, let's say 180 degrees. When it hits 180, power goes out, and then you can set a differential on it, so it has to fall, let's say 15 degrees, 10 degrees, 15 degrees, 5 degrees, whatever, before it goes out through the other pole. So it comes in through C, goes out through A when it hits 180, has to drop to 165, let's say, before, if you set the differential at 15, before it goes out through B. And then as it warms back up, it has to hit 180 before it goes out through A again. So I've got 2 of those in this system, and that's really how it works. So here's my sketch of a zone controller. This is the device that tells the circulators to turn on when a thermostat calls for heat in part of the house. The zone controller has these little ice cube relays in it. It also has a little transformer that makes the 24 volt electricity for the thermostats, low volt electricity for the thermostats. They're the thermostat wires that come in. So when a thermostat tells the zone controller this zone needs heat, then this 24 volt circuit here closes, and that relay closes. The relays that I've drawn in blue there closes, and that sends the 120 volt electricity to the circulator pumps. Here's a picture of what my zone controller looks like in real life. So you see all those little ice cube relays plugged in there, and you see the transformer off on the left, and up on the top you see where it says thermostats. That's where the thermostat wire comes in, and you can see I've partially started wiring circulator wires into the bottom of it. There's a picture of the power coming into the zone controller, and an image of the zone controller when it's active. Those little LED lights come on and show you that it's active. That's a zone controller completely wired up, my zone controller, with the red and white thermostat wires coming in on the top and the wires to the circulator going out the bottom. So there's the wires, the red lines indicating power going out to the circulators. They're the circulators for the zones. So every time a thermostat calls for electricity in a zone, it activates the relay. The relay sends electricity to the appropriate circulator. And what also happens is a signal from another relay, from the relay, the most left little ice cube relay, sends a signal to the propane boiler telling the boiler to start up. Propane boiler has power that comes to it, and when it gets this signal from the zone controller, the propane boiler starts heating, and it tells its circulator to turn on. So it starts circulating its hot water through its tight T, and that gets picked up by the zone circulator and circulated to the appropriate zone in the house. So in my system, here is the SPDT Aquastat. So this is a Aquastat that sits on the supply line that comes in from the wood boiler outside. So what happens is when that water flowing in there gets hot enough, it can trigger this Aquastat. And then there's also a single pole double throw switch on the thermal tank with a little capillary and bulb that goes into the tank that measures the temperature of the water in the tank. Here's a picture of the Aquastat in real life on the supply line from the wood boiler. Here's a picture of the single pole double throw switch and the little capillary, copper capillary that goes up into the tank, this thermal tank. So here we are with most of the parts in my system. Here's how we made this work now. You'll see in this drawing that I just took out the signal wire that goes to the propane boiler. So the propane boiler is no longer going to be told when the zones are calling for water, for heat. And what we're going to do is, and this is the thing my neighbor helped me figure out. Actually, he figured it out and helped me tell me how to do it. What we're going to do is bring another power source into the zone controller. And this is 120 volt electricity. That left relay is capable of handling 120 volts. So we're going to run this, and that left relay is the one that sends a signal to the propane boiler. Essentially, it's the relay that says whatever zone comes on calling for heat, this relay says turn on the boiler. So we're going to switch this 120 volt electricity through that relay. And when the thermostat calls for heat in a zone, it's going to send 120 volt electricity to the single pole double throw switch, Aquastat, that's on the supply of hot water from the wood boiler. So as long as nothing in the house is calling for heat and the wood boiler is running, it's the circulator back in the wood boiler outside is just sending its hot water through the thermal tank and heating up the thermal tank. But when a zone calls for electricity or calls for heat, then electricity is switched to the single pole double throw Aquastat. If the parameter is met, 180 degrees in this case, on that Aquastat, then what happens is it switches power to the circulator that is on the tight T that's on that supply line from the wood boiler, and it starts directing water from that supply line, from the tight T on the supply line from the wood boiler into the tight T on the manifold, and then that gets picked up by the circulators. If the Aquastat doesn't have the parameter of 180 degrees met on the supply line from the wood boiler, then it switches power to the thermal tank, where there's also this single pole double throw switch. If the thermal tank is above its set point, let's say 150, then the single pole double throw switch will send power to the circulator there, which is on the tight T on the manifold on the header, and that will start circulating water through the circulators to distribute it to the house. If the parameter of 150 and the differential, so let's say it's, I think I've got set pretty high there, so let's say it's below 120 in the thermal tank, then the switch will send power to the propane boiler, and the propane boiler will come on. Now you want to know, how does the propane boiler know to come on? Because I've removed the wire that sends a signal to tell it to come on. Well, we just nutted the wire together, because when the thermostat activates and sends a signal, all it really does is connect to the two wires. So I just nutted the wires together. That's what it looks like in real life. So essentially, the propane boiler is always being told to come on, but it doesn't ever have electricity to come on, unless the path through all these other switches has been completed. So this is a map of the whole system and how it works. And I can say so far, it's only late November, but so far this year it seems to be working really well. Now, the point of this video was partly to make a map for myself, so if I have to fix this a few years from now, I've got some idea what the hell I did. But it's also because I really didn't understand how any of this worked when I started doing it, and it would have really been helpful for somebody to explain to me how they set up their system so I could figure out how to set up my own system.